And we're really delighted to have had the conversations we've had over the past days, and also to welcome this final panel, which is entitled Modern Languages and Digital Decolonisation. And all the papers in some way fit, I think, broadly within that title. And I'm delighted to welcome first Dr. Juan García-Precedo, who is Deputy Director of Language Teaching at the University of Exeter. And Juan holds a PhD in Spanish literature, an MA in Hispanic literature, and a PGC in TESOL. And he's been the Director of Language Teaching in the Department of Modern Languages and the Foreign Language Centre since 2017. And he's taught at various universities in the UK, the US, and Spain. As Deputy Director of Language Teaching at Exeter, he has contributed to dynamise the language provision of the degree programme and the Foreign Language Centre as a coordinator of a range of pedagogical initiatives, facilitating student engagement, motivation, and the development of further competence in the study of languages. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Juan, who today is talking about confronting the colonising effect of commodified education in language teaching at the University of Exeter. So Juan, I'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I'm really glad to be here, that you managed to set up this alternative version of the conference that we were due to have in, I think it was April, May, I can't remember now. Should I just share my screen already?
Please do, yeah.
Okay, so I'll do this now. And I'll put it on presentation mode. Okay, so I hope you can all hear me. So thank you very much for joining me in this presentation. So as Joseph said, my name is Juan García-Precedo. I'm the Deputy Director of Language Teaching at Exeter. And the purpose of this talk is to assess the impact of progressive marketized higher education sector in the UK in particular, which can be metaphorically be seen as a mode of colonization, as it has a clear impact in how degree programs and module syllabi are devised. So in this presentation, I would like to share my own experience as a language tutor and coordinator at Exeter, where I convene the Spanish provision for Year 2 students in the degree program. So what I'll do is I'm going to switch off my camera so you can concentrate on the PowerPoint. Okay, so I'm going to be passing on slides for you to know exactly what I'll be talking about. Can you actually see my slides passing on at all? Not sure. Yeah. Okay. Now
yeah, we can. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. So in this talk, as I said, I will first address the various challenges associated with the influence of neoliberal economies and the progressive marketization of universities in the UK, where syllabi across disciplines have been colonized to accommodate extra academic or para-academic factors that universities perceive as crucial to attract the interest of prospect students or customers, if you like, for their degree programs, and to strengthen also the recruitment and financial figures. And in my experience, some of the aspects that had a major influence in designing syllabi for language modules have been providing a further focus on employability in particular, addressing student satisfaction rates and raising awareness about the year abroad. So this results in less time available for conventional language instruction, which is an issue that students themselves have identified in their student satisfaction questionnaires. So this in a way has turned into a vicious circle in my case. In the second part of the presentation, I will comment on the measures we decided to put in place at Exeter to decolonize syllabi from the impact of marketized education by enhancing the value of guided independent study in particular, and how the notion of a flipped classroom has allowed our Year 2 students to enjoy a comprehensive learning experience where conventional language instruction and the requirements of commodified education can more easily coexist. So I should first start by mentioning what do I mean exactly by marketization of education, and in doing so I will follow Julia Kwong's approach that you have in front of you, when she analyzes how different forces and needs have shaped today's school education in the era of globalization. So according to her, marketization in education refers to the adoption of free market practices in running schools, and these include the business practices of cutting production costs, abandoning goods not in demand, producing only popular products, and advertising products to increase sales and the profit margin. So I think it seems obvious that the definition above also applies to the reality of the higher education sector in the UK. So in recent years, we have seen that universities nationwide have stopped offering a number of degree programs as they were considered as no longer viable due to low student recruitment, among other factors. So with this in mind, universities tend to pressurize departments to ensure that the programs are competitive in terms of their ability to attract the interest of further students and to contribute to their institutional financial agenda. And as I mentioned before, this can be metaphorically be seen as a form of colonization, by which the interference of the requirements of a free market has a direct impact in the way modules and knowledge is presented to students. So Kwong refers to the colonizing power of marketization when she refers to the current debate in school education, as you can see in the quote that you have in front of you. This quote, which can be easily extrapolated to universities in the UK, suggests that there is a tension between the constraints derived from the assimilation of capitalist practices in higher education and an opposing reaction which demands that knowledge and teaching is not adulterated by external factors which may compromise the ability of professionals to transmit knowledge in itself. So we have to note that humanities is one of the academic fields more negatively affected by the marketization of higher education, and modern languages departments and foreign language centers in particular, which have either merged, shrunk, or even closed down in some cases. So we could mention many examples of this in the UK from many institutions nationwide, but the key issue here, as Pat Connor suggests, is how capitalist practices adopted by universities have imposed the sense that degree programs need to be useful, and I'm using useful in inverted commas, for the job market primarily. And should they are not, their mere existence becomes less relevant or even irrelevant. And as you can see from the quote on your screens, utility is a concept closely associated to the requirements of the job market. So we are not discussing here the utility of knowledge on itself, but the utility of knowledge to address the needs of the job market in capitalist and even neoliberal societies. So according to Doran and Natale, in capitalist societies, knowledge only becomes relevant when it serves a pragmatical purpose. And some knowledges, and consequently disciplines, academic disciplines, become more relevant than others, particularly those in which students can assimilate marketable skills that can be of the interest of future employers. So at the end of the day, certain academic knowledge and disciplines are less useful than others, attracting less interest from students and employers, and ultimately from marketized universities. So choosing between intellectual development and developing an attractive professional profile is one of the most controversial dichotomies academics face when designing syllabi for language modules, in my experience. So employability and the increasing push from universities to embed transferable skills in our language modules has forced many of us to readjust our syllabi to accommodate such content, in the detriment of conventional language instruction. But contact time still remains the same. This means that tutors have to make an increasing effort to optimize teaching time. Although time constraints frequently force tutors to have to make choices and to prioritize employability-related contents over strict language instruction in order to present their modules in a less academic but more useful, I'm using useful in inverted commas again, in a more useful manner. But the pressure to apply this pragmatical approach does not only come from universities themselves, but also from students. I would like you to focus on the two quotes that you have in front of you. So students who have frequently embraced and applied the notion of utility to the degree programs and evaluate their value according to the ability of their degree programs to prepare them for the demands of the job market. So this obviously translates into students' interest in degree programs and universities ultimately focusing on recruitment numbers, which are at the end of the day a crucial but plain factor that will inform universities of the relevance of offering or retaining a discipline. So universities have indeed other resources to assess the utility of modules and disciplines, and student satisfaction questionnaires emerge as one of them. By allowing students to rate their modules, universities assume, again, a capitalist practice where clients are given the opportunity to rate a product so that the university can reconsider its relevance if needed. So students, on the other hand, have assumed their role as customers, as you can see on the two quotes in your screens, and evaluate the degree programs that they have purchased by implementing primarily the notion of utility in the job market. So student questionnaires, internal and NSS, have been widely used to identify areas for improvement in modules and programs in terms of utility, not just for students in the job market, but also in terms of the financial benefits that they may entail in terms of student recruitment. So they are therefore a reflection of the capitalist practices universities have embraced, making academics less in control of contents and potentially compromising how academics present knowledge to students. And student satisfaction questionnaires have therefore turned into another form of colonization by which tutors are usually required to make adjustments to the syllabi to accommodate students' requests, even though they may not be well positioned enough to evaluate the pedagogical value of the teaching they receive. So this neoliberal approach to teaching and learning may jeopardize the role of universities themselves, and academics should be devolved the ability to define and assess adequate ILOs, as the Lukian Kogan suggests in the quote that you can read on the screen. So, as mentioned, the colonizing effect of neoliberal approaches to teaching and learning adopted by universities and students force tutors to make choices in their syllabi and to prioritize some aspects, such as employability or student satisfaction, over strict language instruction. So this translates into a major issue, which is lack of contact time. Tutors have been required to integrate new essential aspects to their teaching, but the amount of contact time still remains the same. And this has indeed led to many of us to come up with imaginative solutions so that the marketization of higher education does not compromise education itself. So now I'd like to share with you my experience at Exeter. And when I became in charge of the Year 2 Spanish modules in our degree program, I first designed a conventional syllabus where in-class grammar instruction was then followed by in-class and out-of-class practice. So even though I applied my own criteria as a language expert, very soon I was invited to rectify and include employability as an integral part of the syllabus and to address student satisfaction concerns related to year-abroad awareness, the level of complexity of the module, and curiously enough, contact time, as students perceived they were not receiving enough language instruction. So these student requirements posed a huge challenge for me, which was basically how could I confront the interference of this consumer-oriented approach to syllabus design and ensure that my students received sufficient language instruction so that the ILOs at that level were not compromised. So the answer for me was to work on guided independent study and to allow students to enjoy further opportunities to engage with their learning outside class through technology. And this is how we created our virtual classes, which I'm going to present now. So the virtual classes at Exeter are a complement to contact time that aims at anticipating all grammar and cultural topics that students were meant to cover during contact time. So they provide grammar instruction and input activities that allow students to get familiarized with the topics that they have to cover in class at their own pace, leaving time enough during contact time for the other now essential aspects such as employability. So the virtual classes have also been a successful way to address student satisfaction concerns that requested more contact time, more employability, and more year abroad awareness. And I would like to explain the rationale behind choosing guided independent study. Oops, I'm not sure if you can. Yeah, you can. I'm going to explain to you why I decided to choose guided independent study as a solution to conciliate the interference of commodified education in teaching and learning. So overall, the use of the internet as a learning resource has not only altered teaching practice, but also shaped the way language learners access knowledge nowadays. And online resources have fostered a solid sense of autonomy and self-sufficiency that occasionally puts the role of the teacher at stake. Nevertheless, the socioeconomic intricacies triggered by the consolidation of a self-aware 9K generation and increasing self-perception of students as customers have returned the attention to the role of the tutor. And the amount of resources available online may feel unmanageable, and the figure of the tutor has emerged again to filter and facilitate adequate online learning tools, addressing learners' increasing preference for independent study. So this is basically the rationale why I decided to come up with the virtual classes as a way to facilitate guided independent learning to my students. So I'm going to show you how the virtual classes look like, but first of all, I would like to just summarize their purpose. As I mentioned before, they are weekly preparatory sessions with grammar video tutorials followed by some input activities that are aimed at Year 2 students from the post-A-level cohort. These videos and activities are flexible and adaptable. They are easily amended if needed, and it is possible to adjust to different levels. And they have been created with two separate softwares. One of them is Powtoon, which is a way by which you can create animated videos and presentations. And all materials were hosted on Wix, which is a free web hosting site. So with these virtual classes, students can anticipate the content of the language seminars every week. They can anticipate the grammar that we are going to practice, the cultural point or the cultural topic that we are going to cover, and they are obviously entirely in the target language. And they serve the purpose of independent study. So they allow students to raise awareness and self-awareness on the topics that we cover. For language learning development. They provide independent study guidance, so they don't just throw students into the wild, so they provide some structure to their independent learning, and they promote a comprehensive knowledge and personal interest of the target language, and obviously they remain sensitive to the ways students access knowledge nowadays. So what I'm going to show you now is an example of the video tutorials, of the grammar video tutorials that are hosted in these virtual classes. They introduce the cultural topic of the week. they are followed with some structured input activities, and they provide, as I said, grammar guided grammar instruction. So I'm going to switch off the sound from the video, but as you will be able to see here, this is entirely in the target language. In the videos introduce the students to the cultural topic and the grammar topic every week. So this session that you have in front of you is about art in the Hispanic world. And the videos always remind students to pause the video in case they need to reflect or need to take some time to assimilate all the content and knowledge that is being shared with them. So obviously this is just a very condensed version of the video. So what you can see goes really fast, but students are given enough time to go through every slide. So the first activity usually is a reading comprehension activity that introduces the cultural topics. So in this case, that was Frida Kahlo. So students have to read a text that can be found underneath the video tutorial. And then they are provided with the answers to the video, to the reading comprehension, sorry. So once they have completed the reading comprehension, we ask them to engage with some grammar instruction that they could not do in class any longer, because we have to introduce these other aspects, essential aspects such as employability, etc. So this grammar instruction had to be transferred into the virtual classes, and students have to complete them at their own pace. And finally, we offer students the opportunity to start practicing this grammar with some input activities by which they get further familiarized with the cultural topic and the grammar point that we then will be practicing the following week in class. So this is basically what the video tutorials are about. So as I said, underneath the video tutorial, students can find the grammar activities, the input grammar activities, which include a reading comprehension, a grammar exercise, and then a listening comprehension exercise. And basically, with this resource, we've managed to address student satisfaction and also to resolve the issue about time, about how much contact time we were allowing students to have. So at the very beginning, students were not happy about not having enough year abroad preparation, little discussion in class for current affairs, etc. They requested more contact hours, and thanks to the virtual classes, we now have enough time for year abroad preparation. We have time for discussions on the cultural topics and grammar, and we have also students engage with their own learning by having them completing the grammar part at their own pace. So we never had, from that moment, any concerns about, how efficient the contact time we were offering them was. So that was it. Thank you so much for coming to this presentation. I'm going to try to return to my role and to show my video again. So I hope I didn't go too much in excess of the time.
No, thank you, Juan. That was fascinating. Thank you very much for such a detailed paper. I'm just going to go straight on to our next speakers, and then we'll have the Q&A at the end, if that's okay. So our next speakers are Anna Reimão and Rosalba Biasini, and I'll introduce Rosalba and then Anna, but I'm also aware that this paper was co-written with Dr. Barbara Spadaro from the University of Liverpool as well, who couldn't make it today. So this is a kind of collective effort, and important to recognise that. So Rosalba is lecturer in Italian at the University of Liverpool, where she's been teaching Italian language and culture at all levels since 2013. She graduated in classics in 2004. She holds an MA in translation studies, a DPhil in Italian from the University of Oxford. She also holds a master's in didactics of Italian as a foreign language, and her research interests and publications span from literature of the Italian resistance to didactics of Italian as a foreign language, with a special focus on the use of translation and digital tools in foreign language learning. And Anna is a lecturer in Portuguese at the University of Liverpool, where she has taught Portuguese language at all levels, as well as 20th and 21st century literature since 2005. She routinely organises cultural events to promote language development, including translation slams, film screenings, concerts and talks with authors, as well as fostering intercultural exchange while providing ample opportunities to create a solid academic community. In 2017, she founded Tropo UK, which is the Association for Teachers and Researchers of Portuguese in the UK, and who we heard from on Wednesday. And that was with a view to facilitating the exchange of best practice in teaching and learning Portuguese. And that's grounded in a kind of suitably informed pedagogical and linguistic research. So really grateful that you could both make it to present this paper today. And your title is Language Stories in Liverpool, from a transnational to a decolonial approach to language teaching. So I'll pass over to you, Rosalba and Anna. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe and Manuel, for having us. I'm now sharing my screen so that we can start the presentation. Yes, can everybody see that? My first slide with the title?
We can indeed, thank you.
Okay, brilliant. So there's our title, Language Stories in Liverpool, from a transnational to a decolonial approach to language teaching. I'm Anna Reimão, and I'll be presenting, as Joe said, with my colleague Rosalba, and Barbara Spadaro couldn't be here with us today, but we are presenting on her behalf. So I'm now very conscious after Juan spoke that some of the things that I say might make him shift on his seat. I feel like I'll have to kind of nod to him at some points, or sort of police myself about what I'm going to say. Yeah, anyway, I'm going to tell you about the project aims of Language Stories in Liverpool. We're going to tell you what our students did in this project, and then also how we integrated the project in the syllabus through assessment and feedback, followed by some reflection on the challenges and lessons learned. Okay, so Language Stories in Liverpool, in a nutshell, is a public-facing Facebook page that our students contribute to using different languages, so the languages that they study with us, and by doing that they expose these languages that are present and the ways in which they are present in the city where we live and study. So we wanted that this work that we've developed with our students embedded research-connected teaching. So we do it in language learning. I think many of my colleagues in universities deliver research-connected teaching, and they are researchers, but sometimes language is relegated to or perceived as being relegated to a different plan. But we wanted to make sure that that wasn't the case here. We also wanted to raise awareness of the transnational dimensions of the languages and cultures in question, so Portuguese and Italian. We are language teachers, these are language modules, so we want our students to consolidate their linguistic skills, but also their cultural awareness, in this case through collaborative work with their peers, with their teachers, and sometimes with other intervenients from the community or invited speakers. And we wanted our students to develop transferable skills. And obviously, as Juan mentioned, it is very much part of the agenda of higher education to develop employability skills, and we are well aware of that. I suppose there's perhaps an innovative way by which we are doing it, and I'll point out to it in my presentation. So some of these transferable skills go beyond linguistic skills, but linguistic and cultural mediation, interviewing, editing, or whatever the students deem necessary to carry out their projects. Okay, so who are we in the team? So you can see a picture here of myself, Rosalba, Barbara, who isn't here today, but also a guest that we invited for the 2018 edition of the project, and I'll tell you about him in a second. So the team is the lecturers in Portuguese and Italian, our students, and they were year 2 students and final year students in different Italian and Portuguese modules. And we always want to have a guest speaker. So in last year we had Juliano Sacomani, who was a doctoral student at the University of Georgia and visiting fellow in Liverpool. He's since finished his PhD, so he's now Juliano Sacomani. And Juliano researches in Italian immigrant communities in Brazil and Argentina, and their representation in media and diasporic newspapers. So his research is very much transnational, and we wanted him to talk about that to our students, to also make them aware that the language skills that they acquire by attending the university and doing a language degree can be useful for their careers in the future if they want to do research, so they can carry on doing that. And we wanted to give them examples of how they can use languages, but also several languages. In addition, Juliano is also chief editor of the magazine Falai that Barbara is holding in this picture. And this is the magazine of the Portuguese program at the University of Georgia. It's a bilingual magazine. And because he was our guest speaker that year, one of the outputs of the project was also a special issue of this magazine that contained, among other things, the texts that our students produced in this project, in the language stories in Liverpool. So in fact, the magazine, actually, Rosalba will show you, there's a print magazine and also a digital version, and Rosalba will show you some in some of the next slides, an example of, you can see the cover of the magazine. Barbara was a researcher in the Transnationalizing Modern Languages project, and the project produced a policy report called Reframing Language Education for a Global Future. We took this report into account when we designed and constructed this activity. So in the policy document targets specifically key issues around developing cultural literacy in language education, while questioning the association of language and nation. Therefore, we wanted our students to experience that cultures travel beyond the borders of nation states, and that there are opportunities for them in Liverpool to engage with, to translate and to transform the cultures that they are studying. Okay, Rosalba, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. So I'm going to describe a little bit more in details what we've done with our students. The project I'm describing is what happened in 2018-19, and I'll explain in a little bit what happened or didn't happen during last academic year and for what reasons. So during the second semester, we shared with students we anticipated to them that we're going to take part in a research activity, and during the semester they received an email from us, both in Portuguese and Italian, that they were going to take part in this activity in a certain week of the semester, which would focus on the mobility of languages and cultures in Liverpool, with the aim to produce a multilingual digital platform. We didn't tell them Facebook yet, but eventually, as Anna was saying, this is what we used. So we told them to be prepared, and ahead of that specific week, they should form independently some groups and go around town, so really actually investigating the city and finding traces or signs of the target language, so either Portuguese or Italian, that and culture that they are studying. We also gave them some idea of what to look for, so observe the streets or museums, libraries, buildings, and so on. And also we told them to focus on something specific, so something like food or an architectural element, or an object, people, and to collect evidence in the form of pictures, videos, audio files, or any other format. We also told them that eventually what they were supposed to do was create a written piece in the target language about this experience. Next slide, thank you. So what did they do? As you can see here in the pictures, you have two images of the two events that took place in that specific week. So ahead of the week, as we said, they were supposed to go around the city and to find these elements. Then when week 8, so during the semester this week arrived, they had on the Monday a skills talk with Giuliano, that you can see here with the students. And with this experience, he gave lectures about skills, not only in terms of how to research on this specific topic, but also in terms of how to approach writing a piece that would end up editing and on a magazine or before on the Facebook page. So the event was led by us, with Giuliano talking and focus on this type of skills. During the week, the students continued their experiences. Some of them did their field work in that week. Some could already started to write and kind of put together the written piece with pictures and so on. And then eventually at the end of the week on the Fridays, you can see at the second photo, we run a workshop during which students could get feedback on their writing. So those that had already something written, or even those that just had some ideas of what they wanted to work on, came with a written piece in either Portuguese or Italian, with the pictures, and they received feedback on how to structure it for the Facebook Fest, and as I said, for later for a magazine publication. So Giuliano was very useful in this, also because he's Portuguese speaker, he knows Italian, and he gave very good ideas for in terms of the skills that he presented also on the Monday. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So here you can see the first output. So how the language stories in Liverpool Facebook page looks. We screenshot a couple of, well, 3 stories here, but you can have an idea of what you find there. So the stories that the students have written, of course with the permission, so they were supposed to send them to us, were published on this page. So as you can see, it's a multilingual digital platform, so you can see it is written either in Italian or in Portuguese. Some students also provided a translation into English of the piece, and with the pictures, so they actually went around town, and in some of these pictures you can actually see the students themselves that took pictures with in this case, the establishments that they decided to reflect on. As you can see here, they're all either bars or restaurants, so clearly the students identified food as one of the elements of this migration from either Portuguese speakers or Italian speakers. Thank you, Anna. And this is the second output. So after that experience, we could publish together with Giuliano this special issue of Falai called Language Stories in Liverpool. As Anna said, Giuliano is the editor of this multilingual or bilingual publication, and so he gave us the whole issue to reflect on these stories. So the students could send us the pieces that they've written for the Facebook page with an added reflection on their experience. So as you can see, some pages here, there's pictures of Liverpool. First one is a famous monument of the city, in the middle one, our university. In the magazine, we also added a reflection from us, the lecturers, as well as some pieces in English by some members of the old Italian community in Liverpool, and one in Basque by a colleague. So we really created a truly multilingual issue for to reflect on the stories of languages in Liverpool. Thank you, Anna. Okay, so now this has been great. So the students had fun. Of course, not all of them, I'll talk about this a bit later in terms of challenges, took part in this, because it was the field work could have been something voluntarily done, but we managed to link it to assessment, which was for both Italian and Portuguese, the 20% of the module mark. So doing that, the students were forced to take part into the activity.
Encouraged,
thank you. So they, of course, we value the cultural aspect, the intercultural aspects as well of the experiment, but we have to understand the students are busy, they might not be available, some of them work. So we linked it to the assessment, and in that way, the students were to take part in it, because for Italian, for instance, the oral exam in the second year, so 2 modules, students were to reflect on the language stories in Liverpool experience, describing the object of their research. So they had to go and do a research if they couldn't join any of the groups, so even if they didn't write for the Facebook page or for the magazine. And then this would inform the first part of, well, the presentation during the oral exam, and then they would reflect a little bit more on the experience, also with the questions from the examiner. And for Portuguese,
yes, and for Portuguese, they had to do something similar, but it was a written assignment instead. So a 400-word reflective piece on the project. So this piece was not a group work. So they did a project with a group, but the piece was written and submitted individually. So they had to reflect on their own contribution, for example, including the development of soft and hard skills, and describe the benefits, the challenges, etc. So this is very useful for us because it allowed us to gather some feedback and some information about what the students thought of the activity. And I've got some. I'm doing this slide. So I'm trigger happy. So I've got some of some quotes from the students here, explaining that they did perceive this activity as very beneficial. It scared them, but it made them feel more confident once they had done it and more motivated to learn. This was also because it was collaborative. A lot of Year 2 students were in groups with final year students, so they talked a lot about, it forced them to talk about the year abroad and challenges and learn from each other. And so final year students were also mentoring lower level students. So some of the things that students pointed out was about the challenges, but also overcoming those challenges, and about being in touch, the advantage and the benefits of being in touch with other cultures and recognizing the presence of other cultures. So accepting different cultures was something that they pointed out, or becoming a global citizen were also in the wording. They were also through that able to articulate the sort of skills that they acquired, and perhaps that's another advantage. And I suppose if we are talking about employability and one of our goals, students were able to articulate that, but also they were able to articulate it and focus on the skills that they themselves selected that they needed to acquire for the project. So this wasn't a skills project in itself, although as a consequence they did develop them. Okay, so how do we perceive this as a decolonizing project? we understand it as a contribution to decolonizing language teaching and learning, because firstly, we encourage the students to reflect on the global and the colonial circulation of Portuguese and Italian. Well, in Liverpool, obviously, in this case, but also and challenge the cultural stereotypes that are used to represent them. But secondly, we also enable students to produce content for the Facebook page, and therefore we empower them to co-produce the curriculum with us, the curriculum of their studies, since the materials that they create become part of the syllabus for future cohorts. So therefore, the materials that were produced by the students last year were used with our students this year to, and inform the activity, and to generate a discussion about this activity. So the students this year became aware that whatever topics they choose to write on and post on will be also studied in the following year. So they know already they will be informing the syllabus of future cohorts. Yes, over to you, Rosalba.
Thank you. So yes, as you can see, our experience has been positive, and the students gave excellent feedback in terms of the activity, even in terms of the assessment and so on. However, having reflected on this project now for 2 years, we want also to discuss a little bit what have been the challenges and what could be in case some colleagues want to take a similar approach in the city where their students study and live. First of all, they could be institutional barriers. When we decided to start this project, it was already, I think, January, and the semester starts at the end of the month. So the module specification and all the timetable or other arrangement had been already arranged and organized. So when that is the case, it's very difficult to find a way around. For instance, to find a moment where we could have all of the students from Portuguese and Italian together for the meetings on that specific week. But also designing the assessment, because as you've seen, we've done different things in Portuguese and in Italian because we couldn't change the assessment at that stage. But we've been creative, so we always have to find ways to go around these barriers. Also, well, this year we've been also more forced into creative thinking because of the pandemic that forced us to cancel the fieldwork and the experimenting the project as we did in the first year, because we had already scheduled everything, as Anna said, in the first semester. We could also use the materials produced last year to introduce the students to a reflection on their peers' work the previous year. But then in the second semester, when we were really ready to go with our field work, University of Liverpool moved into online teaching that very week, so we couldn't use this as part of the project. And eventually, this is something that we are reflecting on now, because of course, if we want to run something similar, we'll have to think a little bit more on what to do in terms of using remote teaching and online for a similar project. Student engagement, I said something about it, and how to really make sure that the students take part. We found a way of linking it to assessment. At the moment, it seems to be one of the best way, not as a punishment, but just as a way of showing the students that it's an important component of their learning, because we really value the type of skills that the students were achieving, and they recognize the difference, a different approach to what they are studying, but also to the city they live in. So they could already discovered Italy, Portugal, or the other countries that speak these languages in the city where they live. So they had some sort of an introduction ahead of the year abroad, returning from the year abroad. Finally, multilingualism is what we really wanted the students to embrace. I would like to finish on a positive note, saying that it's been successful and that it's an interesting project, and it is, but it is a long process, it's a learning process, and it's not always that easy to let the student understand that they should not only think in terms of that language that they study. Perhaps for the case of Portuguese and Italian, these students always do another language, so they are already not kind of limited or concentrated on that language specifically. But it's a long process, and also the access to the platforms that are multilingual. We've been discussing this, how easy it is to navigate them. Should we provide a translation? But then if we do, students might read everything in English. So this is another challenge that we have in mind, and we are working towards it. We think that the students really embrace multilingualism, but we do understand that it's a long learning process, and it's a long path, but students should be trained to be in this mindset, thinking themselves as a modern linguist, not only students of a language, to also link that language only to a national state.
I suppose I can add to that, you know, in the multilingual side, that we wanted the platform to give visibility to the communities and the cultures that are present in Liverpool, and we thought that we would be failing those languages if we did that through the medium of English. But obviously there is a gap here, because if then the public doesn't speak their languages, they won't necessarily have full access to the content. But that's why it's a learning process. We're still sort of developing this and trying to find the best way forward. And that's it from us. Thank you. Grazie. Obrigada.
Obrigada.
And we'll be happy to take questions at the end.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anna, Rosalba. That's fantastic. Can I move straight on to Paul Spence now? Paul is a senior lecturer in digital humanities at King's College London, and has an educational background in Spanish and Spanish American studies. His research currently focuses on digital publishing, global perspectives on digital scholarship, and interaction between digital culture, and he currently leads the digital mediation strand on the AHRC funded Language Acts and World Making project. And Paul's title today is The Role of Modern Languages in Decolonising the Digital. So I will, without further ado, hand over to you, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you see and hear me okay? Can you see my slides?
We can indeed.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you to the organisers for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I should also thank Renata Brandau and Naomi Wells, two colleagues who've contributed to some of the research on which my observations today are based. Just by general background, I work on the Language Acts and World Making project, which is financed by the AHRC under its Hourly initiative, and now in its final year of no-cost extension. And I lead the digital mediation strand on that project, and with, until recently, Renata Brandau. That strand explores the role of the digital humanities and indeed digital culture more generally in language-based world making. I'll just say something about the first stage of our work. So that the first stage on the project was looking at how the digital mediates modern languages. And last year we produced a report on attitudes towards digital culture and technology in the modern languages. And earlier this month, the Modern Languages Open platform published Critical Digital Pedagogies in Modern Languages, a tutorial collection, which offers online tutorials exploring the theories and applications of digital methods and tools for engaging with modern languages and cultures. The COVID-19 crisis has accelerated conversations about what the 21st century classroom looks like, and thinking about how we should engage with digital culture and methods in modern languages research is obviously an important topic in this context. All of this I give by way of just kind of general context to our work, but this presentation is not really about that. So the standard response when people bring digital culture and modern languages together in the same sentence is to almost exclusively consider how the digital mediates modern languages rather than the other way around. And my talk today is part of a series of interventions I've been involved in exploring how a greater sensitivity towards languages can disrupt digital culture. And as someone who carries out research in the field of the digital humanities, I'm going to be largely focusing on how multilingualism and language diversity disrupt notions of digital scholarship, digital methods, and the critical infrastructures they're built on. This, incidentally, is not a new topic in digital scholarship. The rapid growth of the digital humanities in recent years has led to intense debates about its terms of representation and criticisms from within the field addressing asymmetric relationships and dynamics in its geographic, cultural and linguistic, professional and epistemological practices. Initiatives such as Global Outlook DH with its translation toolkit and DH Whisperer initiative disrupting the Anglophone monolingualism of conferences using informal peer-to-peer interpretation have sought to address the immense Anglophone linguistic and cultural bias which digital culture has amplified and which DH has often, albeit unintentionally, reinforced within its own areas of influence. These have been strongly influenced both by post-colonial perspectives manifested in Rupika Rizam's work on New Digital Worlds, where she explores the challenges in producing local forms of knowledge using context-sensitive frameworks for digitally mediated knowledge production, and by model languages research, notably through the concept of model languages inflected digital humanities, or DHML, proposed by Pittman and Taylor in a Digital Humanities Quarterly Journal article in 2017, as a means to provide stronger intellectual engagement between digital humanities and model languages. Now, while many of these efforts have aligned closely with the model languages, and there have been growing efforts to consolidate this work both programmatically and theoretically through initiatives such as the Digital Model Languages series, which I co-host with Naomi Wells, there is still a strong sense that we need a stronger and more explicit focus on model languages and multilingualism in digital practice across what is currently very much a fragmented regional, linguistic, and disciplinary landscape. And this is closely entwined with discussions about how to decolonize digital media. So recent initiatives on the digital humanities have explored both theoretically and practically frameworks for linguistically diverse and language-sensitive approaches to digital scholarship, in particular aiming to improve the visibility of scholarship in and about model languages and cultures other than English. And this work is long overdue. Thomas Mullaney contrasts the vibrant digitally mediated environments available to even non-expert users in Western European and American contexts, who in his words can download off-the-shelf analytical platforms and data corpora and venture into new and cutting-edge research questions with, again, quote, the context of Asian studies, where we find an environment in which many of the most basic elements of digital humanities research remain underdeveloped or non-existent. Even with the best intentions, digital research infrastructure strongly favors Anglophone research and content at present. The pervasive nature of English language in digital culture often means that, in the words of Dombrowski, for most Anglophone scholars in primarily Anglophone countries, the discrepancy between English and every other language is all but invisible. And at present, digital humanities methods and infrastructure offer poor support for the languages of the world as a whole, and then in the case of non-Latin script languages, they sometimes do not function at all. A workshop at the Digital Humanities Conference last year in Utrecht brought together multilingual DH practitioners focused on research involving non-Latin scripts, an area which has seen some noticeable advance in digital humanities in recent years, but the implications of which are poorly understood in Anglophone digital scholarship as a whole. And the workshop addressed challenges in a whole range of areas, including multilingual data curation, optical character recognition, digital research ecosystem design, data and text mining, and machine translation. This initiative represents part of an ongoing dialogue between digital humanities researchers and library and cultural heritage sector partners aimed at raising awareness of non-Latin script challenges in the design and maintenance of digital scholarship infrastructure. And together with digital studies on right to left languages, it represents a sustained attempt to broaden language coverage in computationally driven research in the humanities. In part inspired by this workshop last year, the recently established Multilingual Digital Humanities Network is another attempt to address the, quote, lack of robust tools for working with non-Latin scripts and the general bias against languages other than English in digital methods and infrastructure. Representing a community-driven effort to draw together, quote, good practices for working with multilingual and multi-script data, the network provides multilingual and language-specific resources, an open source project for multilingual natural language processing, and a forthcoming living non-Latin script digital humanities handbook. Multilingual or cultural critique of digital ecosystems has often focused on social media, in the humanities at least, partly because the affordances and dynamics of Instagram or Facebook seem more accessible to a non-technical audience. But I think what I'm trying to do is to encourage a stronger model languages voice in debates about richer technical digital methods and digital research infrastructures. And I think this would be beneficial for all concerned. how can we approach this technical apparatus from a critical cultural perspective, more broadly connected to debates about decolonized digital practice? Alan Liu explores multilingual challenges briefly in a broader work he's done focusing on diversity, digital diversity, which suggests that DH is unique, quote, unique as opposed to follow-on contribution to cultural criticism, may be, quote again, the techne of diversity. He argues that we need new paradigms, new platforms, and in an expanded version of the essay published in BMLA, he goes on to propose adapting a software metaphor, a diversity stack. This multifaceted approach to diversity, without relegating the social and cultural dimensions, presents highly technical responses to multilingual, multimedia, corpora-based, chronotypical, and identity-related diversity challenges in digital humanities and digital scholarship more generally, and asks us to contemplate the new, highly computational interlingua, which are, he says, are intersectional renderings of, in his words, machine-generated emergent and transitional language forms. And if we take up his call for a new fused techno-ideological apparatus that can do urgently needed work in relation to diversity, how might we then envisage a more substantial response from digital humanities and modern language scholars to linguistic and geocultural deficits and divides? As Liu says, the digital humanities need to solve the language problem, but we would argue that while advanced computational methods can certainly make an important contribution to this challenge, we should not forget that an effective critical response will need to include a combination of social, cultural, and technical dynamics, which should be as much driven by language disciplines and professions as computational perspectives. I think this is a little bit what's missing at the moment. So elsewhere, I've argued that the digital humanities, along with other areas of digital theory and practice, would benefit from playing a more significant role in the language-related cultural questions of our era in the future. Here I'm going to suggest that the modern languages should engage, for example, more strongly with the design assumptions, digital divides, and underlying dynamics of the emerging digital methods and ecosystems which it increasingly uses. In a forthcoming article with Renata Brandão, I argue that digital humanities as a whole has, for example, been notably mute in its response to the series of cultural battles which operate behind set-piece polar oppositions in debates about topics such as human versus machine translation, or human languages versus computing languages in the curriculum, which operate in the linguistic cultural sphere. And these debates are too often driven by simplistic discourse of inevitable technological disruption, which attempts to paper over complexities such as uneven digital language support, orality, and the cultural perspective. And greater collaboration, I would argue, between digital humanities and modern languages researchers will help alternative multilingual reorientations for digital architectures, methods, and content to emerge. There are many areas where digital practice could make a greater impact, and one of these is in analyzing and designing critical infrastructure for low resource languages. Digital humanists and modern linguists are already active in some momentous programs to protect endangered, low resource or heritage languages. Numerous projects in Mexico, for example, attempt to conserve the richness of pre-Hispanic languages such as Nahuatl and Maya. And indeed, an article by Nick Thieberger in the Digital Scholarship and the Humanities Journal in 2017 argues that making information about the world's small languages more freely available should be a digital humanities project, promoting greater invisibility for language repositories, developing initiatives to connect endangered language resources, and elevating the value of oral evidence in research. In Other Worlds, Other DHs, Notes Towards a Digital Humanities Accent, Rupika Rizam identified one crucial challenge as being the recognition of both local specificity and global coherence in digital humanities. And we could extend this to digital scholarship more generally, a theme she pursued further in the book I mentioned earlier, New Digital Worlds. In the book, Rizam applies post-colonial perspectives to code studies and interface design and content management, and calls on us to resist the logics and dynamics of digital universalism. One important manifestation of this community-informed practice is in locally situated human-computer interaction, HCI. And Miguel Escobar Varela has argued that we need to take an emic approach as opposed to an etic approach to constructing user experience in digital research through user interfaces which embed the rhetorical, gestural, and visual conventions of given cultural communities, particularly in the case of underrepresented cultural subjects. Escobar Varela's question, can we design EMIC interfaces for intercultural exchange, offers a compelling challenge in this regard. Other initiatives propose action plans to address digital divides in the underlying infrastructure of the internet. The 2019 meeting of the Decolonising the Internet Network built a collaborative agenda for action to decolonize the internet's languages as part of a process which is technical, but in their words, even more critically, is a social and political effort. And their agenda, in the words of its organizers, and in particular I'm quoting here Anasuya Sengupta, sees language as a proxy for knowledge and explores the conditions for creating a truly multilingual internet, embodying multiple forms of knowledge. In a similar vein, in June this year, we hosted with Naomi Wells a workshop titled Disrupting Digital Monolingualism to address the challenges of multilingualism digital spaces and to collectively propose new models and solutions. The workshop explored four main areas, with continued engagement post-workshop by groups of digital and language practitioners focused on each theme. They're still working on these themes as I speak. And these areas were, on the one hand, linguistic and geocultural diversity in digital knowledge infrastructures. So, for example, examining how digital knowledge infrastructures embed multilingual or language-focused practice in the social and technical terms. Two, working with multilingual methods and data, so assessing how well digital methods and data practices currently model multilingual dynamics and flows. Three, transcultural and translingual approaches to digital study, asking how we can effectively study intercultural, plurilingual, or transborder perspectives using digital tools. And four, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing in language worlds, so studying the challenges that AI, machine learning, and NLP pose for language research fields and professions. The final reports from that workshop are still forthcoming, so I won't say any more about those for now, but we believe that this kind of collaboration between digital language practitioners will be crucial going forward. In conclusion, in my presentation today, I've explored a number of initiatives to decolonize digital media and flows. Modern languages, which Phipps and Gonzalez argue represent a very fertile ground of difference, of culture and linguistic difference and otherness, have an important part to play here, obviously. And digital humanities, modern language collaborations are most fruitful when they involve what Elika Ortega calls narratives of cultural encounter and cultural mixing, and when they expose cross-lingual or transnational cross-border dynamics, which clearly require a multilingual and translingual sensibility. And in my view, this requires both the digital humanities to engage more firmly with modern languages and cultures, and the modern languages to play a more influential role in the design of the digital ecosystems it uses and which shape our encounter with languages and cultures, whether they're modern or pre-modern. In so doing, they may both jointly help to develop an overarching critical awareness of our multilingual practices in relation to data, methods, tools, and infrastructure, and to craft counter models which instantiate linguistic and geocultural positionality and inclusivity. We somehow, in my view, need to replace monolingual assumptions and English as the default setting with new models for digital scholarship, which are language sensitive by design and from the start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. That's fantastic. I'm going to move straight on, if I may, to our next speaker, and then we'll go straight to Q&A at the end. So, so this is a paper delivered by Dr. Romina Isratii, who is a research associate in the Department of Development Studies in the Center of World Christianity at SOAS. And she previously served as a senior teaching fellow to the School of History, Religions and Philosophies. She also acts as SOAS's GCRF projects officer, focusing on improving the SOAS processes in building strong and healthy international collaborative research with partners in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. And Dr. Isratii has been an active member of the Decolonising SOAS working group since 2016, initiating the Decolonising Research Initiative under the aegis of SOAS Research Directorate in 2019. She's also co-founder of De-Colonial Subversions, together with Moniker Hirmer, who I'll introduce in a second. And that is an open access, multilingual, peer-reviewed publishing platform that aims to subvert Western epistemology and contribute to the diversification of knowledge production. Moniker Hirmer, who isn't here today, but who is also a co-producer of this presentation today, is a PhD candidate at SOAS in the Department of Religions and Philosophies, and she's also a teaching assistant on the course The Margins of Philosophy, Postcolonial, Gender and Queer Epistemologies. She's trained as an anthropologist at the University of Hyderabad in India, from where she obtained her MPhil, and her research at the kind of moves at the intersection of ethnography and philosophy, to which she applies a decolonial perspective. Moniker's research interests lie in South Asia, anthropology, decolonial studies, Tantra, and Srividya, goddess traditions, ontology, and gender. And Romina is going to talk to us today about the open access journal Decolonial Subversions, and we're really lucky to have her here today because I know she's been involved in some other conferencing this week and has been really incredibly busy. The title of Romina's and Moniker's talk today is Introducing Decolonial Subversions, a new multilingual open access publishing platform. So I'll pass right over to you, Romina. Thank you very much. Are you muted, Romina? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Yeah?
We can hear you now.
Great. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the introductions. I'm presenting here on behalf of both Monica and I. Monica couldn't make it, but I'm very glad to have her had input into this presentation, since this is a product that we have co-produced and really co-imagined and co-implemented since the very beginning. I'm conscious that I'm not I'm coming from a very different place, and I'm very humbled to be here. I don't specialize in modern languages. If I understand the concept, I would like to deconstruct it maybe on a different occasion, but we do engage with all languages, and maybe there might be some relevance or some insights that could be relevant to your audiences. So I will do an introduction today. If I could, yes. But before I do that, I'd like to just say a bit of how I came to this initiative. Monica would have to tell her own story. I can't tell her story for her, but I'll tell my story, and hopefully that will give you a sense of how we arrived to this initiative. So I have been working for the past decade, primarily ethnographically based in sub-Saharan Africa, in order to address a disconnect that I've seen between gender and development theory, international development theory in general, and communities' own lived experiences and conceptual repertoires. And this has led me to place emphasis on the importance of linguistic and cosmological translation if we really want to understand local experiences and issues of development, ultimately to improve how gender-sensitive interventions happen in non-Western religious societies that I specialize in. I don't teach in languages. I'm not a linguist, but I have experience engaging with languages. I have been trained in about 8 in my life. I am bilingual, and I think my training occurred in about 7 different countries in different educational systems. And I also translate in 4 languages: ancient Greek, modern Greek, Amharic, which is the national language of Ethiopia, and English. So I translate between these languages because of the kind of research I do. So what I'm going to present, is informed by this experience, really. So in the past 4 years or so, since pursuing my PhD at SOAS, which is a critical sort of decolonial deconstruction of gender and development theory and praxis, and sort of the recommendation or the delineation of a different approach. I was also very actively engaged in decolonizing in epistemology, first and foremost in the fields that I engage with, but also the university more broadly, curricula, pedagogy, ways of thinking, and the culture. And I was very interested in also decolonizing knowledge publishing and making knowledge more accessible, because one of the things that Monica and I realized very quickly was that one of the issues that Western epistemology was dominating, and the reason that dominance was maintained was that research was not made available to communities that it concerned. Most of the research produced in international development is never published in the languages of the study communities, which is really scandalous, I would say. So we wanted to, we got very interested into this open access publishing, which became quite a thing, I think, in 2017, 2018. And in parallel, we were doing a lot on decolonization in praxis, really trying to understand how to embody decolonization, how to exist differently and do our research differently in praxis. And recently I got engaged, involved in these initiatives on decolonizing research development and partnerships and looking at research funding. So overall, these initiatives allowed me to understand a little bit the system in which knowledge is produced, not just from the epistemological point of view, the scholarly point of view, but also the structural, material, and normative point of view. And that whole thing sort of led to informed decolonial subversions and what it is today, which I will delineate for you soon. So what is the system? I thought I'd just outline that system as we understand it, because obviously the principles we follow and the approach we follow through this digital platform is very much informed by our understanding of the system. One of the things that we've sort of discerned in our experiences, mostly anthropological, is a disconnect between theory and practice, and between researcher, academic, and communities, or the wider public. And I would actually use the plural publics, because obviously there are multiple publics and they're not uniform. And I have presented before that this disconnect actually is a perverse outcome of a long series of genealogical thought within Western epistemology, tracing back to Enlightenment, and it's not being challenged enough. The other thing we've seen is the dominance, obviously, of English language in both teaching and published research. I will show later on a graph or a study that shows, that most of the research published is published in the global north, and hence about 80% in the social sciences and humanities, and hence, it's mostly in English. And that means, that's not just an issue of language, but it's also an issue of Anglophone standards of knowledge production. So epistemology, but also norms of how you write and how you express oneself, the style and the form and the medium. And finally, we've observed, very Eurocentric standards of knowledge production, which again links back to my other point, how research excellence and research impact are being conceptualized, the politics of citation, whom we cite, peer review norms, and various other issues around knowledge sharing. And of course, these issues, which are primarily epistemological, are being maintained and supported by a system and a combination of structural, normative, and regulatory factors. For instance, in the UK, political and ideological agendas, financial constraints, and other frameworks that influence the higher education sector, whether it is the industrial strategy, Higher Education Research Act, the Haldane Principle, Research Excellence Framework, and so forth, do influence, how research happens and what kind of research is being done. The research funding climate is another important factor because it shapes funding priorities and rules and data management laws, and of course that then influences who accesses funding and who can make competitive funding applications, which I will touch very briefly maybe later on. And the geographical distribution of publishing houses, as well as established publishing norms. Again, peer review metrics that are being used to measure journal success, which are based on citations and who cites whom, and so forth. So the combination of these factors essentially result in a world system that maintains also Western epistemology in its hegemonic position. There was a study that a colleague of mine did, which is actually very pertinent, and I thought I'd mention it, by Martin Demeter in 2019. He has now published his book, which is a more thorough demonstration of this, this argument. And essentially, he demonstrates that there is a corporate restructure in the way that academic capital is being distributed globally. So more than 75% of social sciences articles ever published in periodicals indexed in the Web of Sciences, social sciences list of journals, it was by North American or Western European authors. and just less than 10% by authors in Africa, Latin America, and Middle East and Eastern Europe. And of course, this percentage is an average. It could be much lower. It was much lower for some regions of the world. And of course, in trying to explain this, he also refers to geographical location and the language that is being used by publishing houses, peer review standards, and scientometrics, that is journal metrics, as important contributing factors to this core periphery structure of global academic capital, which is both horizontal and vertical. So we kind of experience this world system in, personally, struggling within this academic culture and trying to publish. And after a long time, we had, as students, we had co-edited the SOAS Journal of Postgraduate Research. And this is where we really started to open, we opened the journal, we included Commons license, publishing license. We took various measures essentially to make it more accessible and multilingual and so forth. But obviously we graduated, and then we thought, we would like to expand this, and we'd like to make it more decentralized and more international. So we came up with Decolonial Subversions, which is really an activist initiative to praxistically change the discourse and change this world system as I described it. So what is Decolonial Subversions? It is an open access and multilingual platform committed to decentering Western epistemology in the humanities and social sciences. As I said, it kind of emerges from the work that we did as editors for the SOAS Journal of Postgraduate Research, which concluded with the volume, which you can find online, open access, Decolonisation in Praxis, and that really sort of published different articles in different forms and styles by students at SOAS and how they approached, epistemological decolonization in their respective fields. And we also had a conference on that theme. It is also a radically subversive initiative that tries to minimize the reproduction of publishing practices which perpetuate inequalities in the global production and distribution of knowledge, such as the one that I outlined earlier. It is, again, a platform that aims to give space for historically silenced knowledge systems at the margins, especially knowledge systems that don't have the same credibility within secular epistemology that dominates in Northern societies. And it is aspired to serve as a bridge between scholarship or knowledge making and practical societal issues, publishing work by both academics and practitioners. So we're really interested to bridge knowledge and research with actual problems and challenges in societies, and make sure that we sort of overcome that disconnect that is currently still quite evident, I think, in academia. The motivations behind this, again, as I said, there's multiple motivations, but one of them is to make sure that people from lower income countries or families can publish and are not obstructed by their lack of funds. So it's a free of charge publishing platform. Currently we work voluntarily, but I'll come back to that later on. The other motivation is to really make a statement that knowledge should be free and freely shared for wider use and critique, most importantly, critique by those it regards, in contrast to the currently widespread, euphemistically only open access publishing model, which is used by established publishing houses. Essentially, the current open access publishing model that prevails expects the author to cover very high APCs, article processing costs. And if they don't cover those, then the article will normally be locked for some embargo period. That I call only euphemistically open access publishing. So it's not what it signals it to be. We also want to break the current cycle of self-affirming Western epistemic hegemony by promoting the citation of non-Western female and other marginalized sources in lieu of antiquated Anglo-American predominantly male voices. So we want to shift away from that politics of citation and really engage with non-Western and other marginalized voices and creators that we haven't really paid attention to until now. And to really, again, promote a way of knowing, I guess, and producing knowledge that is centered on lived experiences and that makes transparent as much as possible and feasible the positionality from each the researcher or contributor or author researcher speaks and writes from. And again, to redress hidden biases in peer review processes. There is a lot of change that is happening within journal publishing in terms of peer review. Some of them encourage open peer review or, with the permission of the reviewer and author. but it's still, there are multiple hidden sort of hierarchies and biases that are not really being addressed. So we're trying to implement a different exploratory model, which I can talk about later more. So the principles and approach. In terms of knowledge, as I said, we acknowledge that even historically marginalized voices do not eschew power hierarchies and do not necessarily represent the full gamut of diverse or often contradictory perspectives. So in essence, we don't consider anyone representative of any group or culture, but we wish to promote, knowledge making that is centered on lived experiences and values everyone's experiences, without sort of claiming that it represents anyone. We also encourage authors to consider and to discuss how their own identities, worldviews, and roles in the research process or knowledge production or creation process has influenced or informed their methodological and theoretical choices. And just I should add here, because I forgot to mention it, that we publish in multiple media, so not just text, but also audio and acoustic and visual, which I'll mention later on again. In terms of language, and this is a big innovation of this platform, which really goes the next level from what journals are currently doing. You might have seen a lot of journals now use multilingual abstracts or abstracts in some modern languages, but actually we encourage contributors to submit their contributions in local languages, where an English version can be also provided, or translate contributions in English to local languages as pertinent to the topic to the community of study or the topic of the research. In essence, we want to make sure that whatever research is being produced is accessible to the community it is most relevant to. We encourage contributions again. So an author could come to us with a contribution in a local language, local as in relation to context, right? Accompanied by an English translation, or in English accompanied by a translation in another language, or contributions that incorporate substantial content of a non-English language. So, we're trying to be flexible with the options. Ideally, we would like to support in the future contributors with translation support, and I'll talk about that. But currently, since we're still in Kuwait and developing, we do hope that and encourage authors to submit in the forms that is most accessible to them and less resource consuming. And by encouraging submission in both languages, we're hoping that ultimately what we hope to do is to ensure that knowledge produced in the margins or from the margins currently, or from the periphery, whatever name you might want to use, informs and is absorbed by English mainstream academia or knowledge production, but also that somehow this non-English or knowledge can subvert the dominance of Anglophone epistemology and scholarship, gradually, and really lead perhaps to not just a diversification of knowledge production, but maybe a decentralization of knowledge production entirely in the future. And in terms of translation, this is another important item of our platform. I just wanted to say that contributors are encouraged to work with indigenous research partners or translators, because we understand that translation is not just linguistic, but it's cosmological. You really translate across cultures. And oftentimes, concepts don't exist in the languages of another culture, and you need to sort of produce those. You need to make arbitrary decisions. And that's why we encourage authors to work together with the translators and to collaboratively and reflectively, and then for translators must be dialect knowledge as co-authors, not just translators, but as co-authors. And of course, where authors are proficient in both languages, they are invited to provide their own translations, providing proper context and justification. And finally, in relation to the peer review process, as I said, we have pioneered a new open review process, open access review process, that hopes to encourage a higher degree of dialogue between reviewer and author. So we do allow authors, there is an option for authors to do the double-blind peer review process, the standard one, but we encourage the open peer review process because we think that this allows the authors actually to be more transparent about the themselves in the research presentation. Because obviously sometimes anonymity is used to mask and contribute the continuation of discriminatory power dynamics. And we also hope that by doing an open peer review process, we let authors and reviewers know each other, and then they're welcome to communicate with each other by email and share more feedback and create collaboration. So ultimately, what we want to do is to see more collaborations that are cross-cultural, transnational, and that where reviewers and authors are on equal terms and speak to each other and have a collegiate relationship. So in terms of the team, currently Decolonial Subversions is comprised of an international team of collaborators and like-minded researchers, practitioners, and professionals from about 12 countries, which you see listed there. We always look to expand more, and we're very open. There's no other rigid criteria of who becomes part of the team, but we do want people who share the vision, really, because we have worked primarily voluntarily. We received some small grants from foundations and the Decolonising SOAS working group, very small grants to set up the website, but obviously we work voluntarily because we have a shared vision. But we hope in the future to set up a more sustainable financing mechanism. The structure, as you say, it's not a vertical structure. I just didn't know how to present it in a PowerPoint. I would say it's more circular. The day-to-day operations, obviously funding editors and technical partners, primarily related to web development and proofreading. Those are the team members that we work with on a routine basis. And then there is the more strategic support team, an advisory board that advises on strategic issues, an editorial board that is very standardized, and then a specialized support team, mostly language partners, who might translate small excerpts or materials that we might need to use within the platform, and then obviously reviewers and translators who differ by volume. And all these members, including the reviewers and translators, are all acknowledged, and their bios are included on the website. Precisely because we want to pay kudos to them and make sure that everyone is being acknowledged as they deserve. So the aspired modus operandi, I think this is my penultimate slide. The aspired modus operandi is really to be collaborative, consultative, mutually fulfilling and beneficial. We want all the team members to get something out of this, to feel fulfillment by being part of this, to publish us if they wish to. We also aspire to a rotational editorialship. This is the first year that we published an annual volume. We hope that in the future we can have an institutional partner sort of autonomously publish the next volume, and so we sort of decentralize that editorial process. Again, bridging academia, activism, and practice in a decentered manner, being very flexible with our power, especially being currently here located in the UK. And continuously revisiting and amending the concept of decolonization or decoloniality as we understand it within the context of this platform. And finally, again, obviously bottom-up approach. We would like to link up with communities and have a more local presence in the different countries we work in. And finally, we'd like to, or ultimately would like to challenge metrics, journal metrics that currently measure impact, journal impact, because these are, as I said, basically premised on citations, and in fact of citations of highly cited papers, which tend to be papers by Northern researchers. And so we'd like to find new ways of really measuring impact in publications. And I think very pertinent to this panel, we use, as I said, this is a digital platform. We have a main website. You can't see the links because it's a white color for some reason, but you can click on them. There is a main website which is interactive. It has text-based, acoustic, and visual publications. We have an Academia EDU page, a Twitter page, which is very, very active. And recently we set up a YouTube account precisely because we are very keen to bridge knowledge production and rigorous research with different publics and societal issues. And what led us to set up the YouTube was COVID-19, really, because we felt that there was a lot of censorship and we wanted to set up a series to talk about it freely and critically with different practitioners and people who are not necessarily within academia. So I'll end here, and hopefully this is somehow relevant to the conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Romina. That really is a fascinating and brilliant project, and it's great to hear about it. So we've now got a bit of time for questions, and I hope you can all stick around. We did schedule to finish the panel at 3:45, but I think we can run a little bit over, and we were going to do just a kind of closing thanks before 4 o'clock. and then we'll finish the conference. But if you have a question, please, you can raise your digital hand by clicking on the participants button at the bottom and then clicking on the raise hand button, or you can write in the chat, which should now be open to everyone. If you'd like to put your question in the chat, I can read it out to people. If you'd like the question to be anonymous, then please direct it just to me and I'll read it out. If you would like to just write in the chat, then please feel free to write in the chat. So I've seen one hand up already. Vincenzo, could I ask you to unmute? Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. And again, thank you very much for these wonderful and inspiring presentations. I keep learning a lot. Thanks to all of you. I have a question, and I hope I don't get into troubles for what I'm about to say. But it's like walking on eggs, like I say, I always tend to say. It's very true what the first speaker Juan said about the marketing, the marketing of the education, the way universities are money making businesses. It's very sad to hear that, but it's very, very true. And it's very sad to think that students with a certain income are more allowed than others to access universities, and universities give a range of opportunities based on the money that could be made. This is something that it's undeniable, unfortunately. On the other side, I've seen beautiful presentations and different ways of approaching and tackle the problem and the issue. And obviously, it's something that goes beyond the universities themselves. It goes to government level, because the ministries of education need to finance, and education goes to politics. But on the other side, I was impressed by the last presentation of Romina, if I may dare to use the first names of everyone. And on the other side, I can see a breath of fresh air, because there is this way of deconstructing knowledge and way of giving space to everyone. And now to bridge these two extremes, I was thinking, considering that university and knowledge is something that has to be sold through strength and selling points, that have to embrace more people to join in, why not use the democracy of knowledge and the more accessibility to knowledge by giving priority, giving importance to those who don't have financial opportunities as a selling point at the same time? I mean, this could be translated in a way without destroying the meaning of democracy of knowledge itself. I mean, why not use this concept as something to be put in first page on the website of a beautiful university that says, we're top in the ranking of universities, we're pride of accepting scholars from all over the world, but at the end of the day, tuition fees are so high, and the methodologies and the strategies adopted are always ethnocentric. So where is this integration coming from? So why not use the democracy of knowledge as proposed, especially in the last presentation, as a strength of a university? That's my question. Thank you.
I could add something to that. Yes, Joseph. Okay.
Please do.
Thank you, Vincenzo. That was great thoughts, really. So the thing is, we are based. Myself and Moniker are based at SOAS currently. Mostly we're based in our field, and we're casual staff, right? We're not academics, we're not established, we're struggling to find our ways around it and be activists as well, and that's really difficult. And while the university is quite supportive of decolonizing, they oftentimes, currently they do it because it looks good, I think, to a large extent, right? And what Monica and I do want to do is to sort of use this discourse as an opportunity just to get the support of the university and host it at SOAS. We could have hosted it at SOAS, but we didn't. We chose chose to honor our partners who are international and really be decentralized. And that means, it's our way of sort of keeping it democratic, if that makes sense. So we could perhaps have used, as you say, this discourse of democratization and decolonization within SOAS, which has momentum currently. But we felt that, once you are associated with an institution, you are what is susceptible to co-option, and that's sort of the norm, right? It's almost inevitable. So yes, I don't know. I don't think that it will ever be, even if universities wanted to truly democratize, I think once it's part of the system, it kind of gets lost within those power dynamics again. So yeah, I think somehow we have to be existing in between boundaries, being liminality. I think that's a concept that might make sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Romina. Did any of the other speakers want to respond to that point, which I think is a really important one?
Sorry, I haven't raised my hand.
So you won't be able to, but as a co-host, but please go ahead.
Okay, I'm raising my actual hand. So I totally agree with Vincenzo. My only concern is how some universities may actually turn this democratization of higher education sector into something different, into the fact that they are turning into a selling point. I'm thinking about how students with special needs have turned also into selling points, and how this has become further pressure into the staff. If you don't have the resources, if the universities don't provide enough resources to be able to address these issues in a proper democratic way, it turns into kind of like a vice kind of approach to it that feels a little bit like you're just making money out of it, without enough resources and putting too much pressure on the tutors. So if you really want to democratize the way higher education is provided in the country, to other students, I guess you have to do it in an honest way, right? And not to kind of disguise it in a way that you can make even more money. So as long as you can provide the resources for these students, but also the preparation for the tutors to address this kind of, very particular situation, I think that should be all right. Otherwise, it may become, again, an issue for the tutors.
Thank you, Juan. Did anyone else want to respond? No, we have a comment actually from Manuale, just thanking Juan for reminding us so emphatically that to decolonize modern languages is also to oppose the marketization of modern languages, and that we shouldn't forget that colonialism is a part of capitalism. Thus, to decolonize should also include the opposition of the steering of modern languages by institutional, profit-driven needs. And she's just thanking Juan for bringing that up. Now, if I may, I have a question for Juan, just off the back of what you presented on the virtual classroom. I was fascinated by this, and I suppose in terms of the opportunity it gives tutors to offer a more, to kind of satisfy the needs, in inverted commas, of students, but also to introduce various kind of diverse perspectives on their subject. How much time did this take to create? And what was the institution giving the tutors to create? What was given to you by the institution to create this? Because it seems like that would take a long time, a lot of resource to create, just from what you showed us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Joseph. Well, this is the question that I always get when I present the virtual classes anywhere. I have to say that, well, first, perhaps when you are young and you take on a new role, you are more motivated. So you don't kind of quantify the amount of work that you put on things. But in this particular case, I was more concentrated on the time that I was actually saving by not confronting the university or the college in addressing a specific issue that was raised in the student questionnaires, rather than the time that I actually invested on this. I didn't invest too much time, to be honest. So I just took, I think, a week to design a whole term of virtual classes. So it wasn't that bad. So the entire year took me a couple of weeks. In terms of the resources that was kind of provided to come up with this, I think it was more important to have been given the opportunity to set up something like this, because it's hosted on a separate platform that is not powered by the university. So my main concern was, am I actually allowed to do this? Am I actually allowed to provide this kind of resource to my students? So once you are given the opportunity to experiment with that, and you have managers that allow you to do so, you do this in a really motivated manner. So it's not that time is not that important in this kind of case. First you want to resolve an issue, then you want to have the opportunity to resolve this issue in the most effective but also creative manner. So that was my main concern, when I came up with this.
Fantastic, thank you for responding to that one. Just a couple of remarks on the chat. So to one again, just a quick question about, are you able to monitor the use of resources on your website?
Well, you can see how many students have actually entered the classes, whether they are being used or not. You cannot monitor, the specific students that are actually using them. What you can do through the virtual learning environment, through the university's learning environment, is to see who has actually accessed the link to the virtual classes every week. So you can actually see whether students have at least, taken the initiative to access them. But in any case, the content of the virtual classes anticipates the content of the contact hours. So if a student don't complete what he's expected to complete before coming to class, then this will be noticed, during contact time. So students know that if they don't complete that, then the students will notice. So this is something that students are aware, and that's why they kind of prefer to complete them, just not to put themselves on the spot.
Fabulous, thank you, Juan. I suppose I had a question for, I suppose it's more a comment question, and I don't have an answer to it, but it's for Anna and Rosalba. And this is about, what you focused on at the end was, the unfortunate having to cancel this last term because of the pandemic. And I suppose I'm wondering, I want to ask a question about the possibility of virtual fieldwork. I mean, I've been exploring this with my colleague Naomi at the IMLR in terms of moving some research that we kind of planned to do online, in person online. And I just wondered, had you thought any, about kind of virtual fieldwork or the possibility of doing virtual fieldwork on social media or anything like that?
Yes, yeah. We have thought about that, and I don't think it will be difficult to replace and to do virtual field work, as long as the students will have the time and the information that's what they need to do. I think we kind of cancelled because we were on the back of 4 weeks of industrial action and going into suddenly 24 hours notice online teaching, and we just had no capacity to come up with instructions, etc. So we just very quickly came up with an alternative assessment, and so they wouldn't have and skip that part of the project. We had covered the initial part where we discussed what other students did in the final year, and asked students to think about what they would do and start getting into groups. But that was it. I think with having a bit more time to plan it, we will be able to do it virtually if we have to in semester 2. The other thing was, we didn't feel at the time that we had the time to support students as well with problems that they would encounter. So we really had to, under the circumstances, for that time. I don't know if you want to add anything, Rosalba.
No, I think that's it. It's really that, as I said, it really happened the week, the move to online, the week that we were supposed to start with the project this year. So, as Sana said, it's been all, it would have been a bit difficult to pack everything and like to revert while we were still reverting teaching. But yeah, it's a good thing to think about for this year, and perhaps if it has to be, we will think about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can see comments going on in the chat. Perhaps I'll leave the chat to the chat, and speakers can respond in the chat if they feel able. If there are any more questions, please raise your hand. I mean, I suppose I just to really thank everyone and reiterate how brilliant the session has been, and it's so good, I think, to just have so many different perspectives on this issue of decolonizing, which, you know, people are coming from, I think, as we said at the beginning, from a very often a very personal perspective, and having you know, very different perspectives on this issue. I suppose just, I mean, in terms of a question for Paul, if I may, and then perhaps if there are no more questions, we can wrap things up. But Paul, you mentioned the oral. I just wondered if you had, you know, elevating the oral in research, and I suppose this relates to what Romina was saying as well in terms of what they're doing at Decolonial Subversions. I just wondered if you had any examples of the way you or your colleagues have been doing that already, or is this something that that you're looking to do in the future? Paul, you are there, aren't you? Yeah.
Hi, yeah. Sorry, I skipped out. Had an internet breakage here for a couple of minutes. I had to go onto the mobile and came back. I'm afraid I don't have any personal examples at the moment, because my research the last sort of 3 or 4 years has been much more kind of this kind of policy level, looking at the relationship between modern language and the digital. But I do know in endangered languages, the orality is obviously a really important part of things. So there are plenty of examples of projects. I can't think of any at the top of my head, I'm afraid, but if you look at digital if you look at Endangered Languages Archive type projects, there are plenty of examples there. So I'm a bit stuck at the moment for examples, but I think that is, in general, is a weakness of, well, my field, the digital humanities and digital scholarship more generally, is because it's so historically been so text-based. A lot of it's based on, you know, literature and linguistic studies, where text witnesses have been very important. It's tended to be something that's marginalized. But I do know that organizations like Clarin, which has kind of got a more kind of linguistic or language corporate type perspective, increasingly incorporate oral perspectives. I'm afraid I can't think of any examples off the top of my head apart from that. Sorry about that.
That's no problem. Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Well, perhaps I'll just move to close the conference now, and just thank the speakers on this panel. What a brilliant panel! And thank you all for taking the time for sharing your practices, your ideas with us, and you know, the wonderful things that you're doing. I suppose I would, yeah, kind of reiterate what we said at the beginning. You know, this is not always going to be an easy discussion, and I think we need to be aware that we don't inadvertently kind of perpetuate the problem in discussing it. And I think that came up, was it yesterday or the day before, from one of our questioners. You know, we are not going to decolonize modern languages. That's not our intention. I think more our intention is to have a conversation about how we engage in a process of decolonization, or a process of diversification or inclusion. And I really think, you know, we've seen many aspects of that conversation, and many important aspects of that conversation come through over the past 4 days. So I just wanted to really reiterate my thanks to all the speakers, to all the questioners who have contributed to such a rich discussion, to my co-organizer Emanuele, who may or may not come back on at the end of this call, and the IMLR Birmingham for they were obviously the original hosts in person, but they've also been equally supportive in terms of hosting us online, and especially Kathy Collins, who's our administrator at the IMLR, who's just been fantastic. Yeah, so in terms of continuing the conversation, Emanuele and I wanted to circulate, and we will circulate, a form that you can fill out, and there's also an opportunity there to give some feedback if you would like to on the conference, and on kind of how we've set up the conference and organised the conference and what you think about that, but to leave your contact details with us, and so we can be in touch with you with future events, but also future projects to organise and carry on the conversation that we've been having, which I think is a really important one. So what we're going to use I'm remembering I don't really have the link to the form to hand at the moment, but we're going to use the list of people who signed up to the conference that we do have, and we'll just send round the link to the form where you can give us your contact details, and we can be in touch in the future. We're hoping to set up some kind of decolonisation, decolonising ML hub or continuing conversation, but we will let you know about that. So just to say thank you again to all the speakers, thank you to the questioners. And thank you all for joining us in this virtual conference, which has just kind of blown me away in many ways. So thank you for that.